Wonderful. Please take a seat. Welcome back to the best track at the conference, track B. So please like it. Please add your comments. So your feedback is really, really important to us. So my name is Lena Lihashkina, and I'm one of the producers for the track B. So we also have Kevin in the room. He just stepped down for a second. He's going to be back. So I'm going to handle introductions, and Kevin is going to be helping with questions. So we would love this session to be interactive. So please feel free to ask your question during the session if you would like to. We're also gonna go in for people who join in online. You can post your question. So we are monitoring questions online. And in the room, you also can post your question online. If you want also not just put your question, but you like somebody else's question, so please endorse the question, so then it's gonna be on top, and it's gonna be asked first, right? So this is how it's work. We are following the social network perspective. So the topic of this session is ongoing governance topic. So I think the last 3 days, I didn't have the chance to count how many sessions, how many times we said the word governance. Probably hundreds, maybe thousands, right? So I'm so happy to have Chris today. So Chris is gonna be continue on the topic of the governance, providing his perspective. So Chris is coming from amazing background. So he has over 30 years experience working on enterprise, big, large change level initiatives, which are related in intersections between technology and data. So most recently, so he was working on big projects with companies like Accenture, right? So you know Accenture is a number one in the consulting industry and service. With Okta Consulting, with General Dynamics. So he does have a really extensive experience with government data and financial data. And you know how much help we all need in government to actually to make our data better, because we are all citizens and we would love to get much better experiences and also contribute to the society later. So Chris, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. We are looking forward to your session, and let's go.
Thanks. Okay, everyone can hear me okay? Yeah, good. Okay, great. So our goal today, I'll try to keep it simple, offer considerations for using the DMBK data lifecycle just as a guide for the tremendous amount of data governance work that we need to do in the federal government. Actually, one more thing. Today's talk is going to include some specific examples for injecting data governance into many existing legacy practices and processes within the federal government. You know, none of them are world-shattering. They feel a little bit new to me based on my experience and observing where things in the different agencies I've worked in recently, you know, the maturity levels the agencies are at, and what minor change might help. The emphasis on minor to try and like encourage federal agencies to use the data lifecycle just from a phase-by-phase perspective to break the enormous amount of governance work down into smaller pieces, smaller stakeholder groups, and just start to make progress. So the fact that the ideas feel just, I hope they're tremendously helpful, but say they just feel a little bit new to me, they may not feel new to you. They may feel, we're already doing that. Matter of fact, we're doing all of that. You know, thanks for nothing. This really wasn't a great help. I don't need to hear feedback like that. But if you disagree, I would love you to just raise your hand real time and just ask questions. The time today allows for us to be pretty interactive. And if I can provide clarity at any point, just throw your hand up and we'll talk through it. A quick heads up, kind of a promise. If you were to disagree, and that would be a very compelling conversation, I'll probably ask you to write a blog with me on citizens, federal CDO. It's called Gov CDOIQ, and where it's fairly new launch, but it's intended to be just an open knowledge sharing service for federal CDOs where everyone comes together, not just citizen, to share ideas. And if any one idea I share today that maybe you don't think it would be feasible or you disagree with, that could be a helpful conversation, and that's kind of why we're here. All the ideas today in this blog are to help federal CDOs solve hard problems, get a lot of work done, resolve ambiguity. So if you're interested and you have a really compelling disagreement, I'll probably ask you to write a blog with me, so be warned. Citizens table, or the booth, is literally right in front of the registration desk. This QR code will take you to our website, describe our services, and this QR code will take you to the open Gov CDOIQ knowledge portal. All right. So let me offer a little context before I talk through the observations shared on this slide. So is everybody familiar with the Federal CDO Council? More importantly, the 11 responsibilities for a federal CDO that are enumerated in that site. Okay, inspired by the Evidence Act, but very, very explicit. So the very first one opens with, and I'll read verbatim with my glasses off, managing data at every stage of the data lifecycle by establishing effective procedures, standards, and controls. That's only half of the first sentence. If you can imagine all the different business units, all the legacy processes that exist, and all the new data behaviors we want to introduce for modern data management governance, for modern data analytics governance, for modern data sharing governance, it can be quite overwhelming. It appears obvious that most all agencies have a data lifecycle, but that sentence I just read, establishing effective procedures, standards, controls, it just seems like an enormous amount of work to inject new data behaviors into huge volumes of existing process. A client that Citizen has currently is up to inventorying about 350 governance artifacts that are directly data governance related or highly impacting, where you have to integrate to some degree. Those are all documents, meeting forums, decision governance groups. It's an awful lot to integrate with. Okay, so ultimately, we want to help with as many ideas as we can, to help our civil servants and frankly empathize with them. It's just an awful lot of work to do. Okay, so real quick, number of stakeholders involved can be overwhelming. You're going to see on the slides today that the stakeholder groups that are called out by each phase are going to repeat themselves a bit from stage to stage, but they're not the same people. They're not the same roles within the stakeholder group. So the combinatorics of it, the number of people you need to interact with step by step to be successful with data governance can be quite high. Legacy processes in which to insert data governance controls are voluminous and complex. So I won't repeat it, but I just gave you one example of a 350 artifact inventory of existing governance. Now, this last one, enterprise data sharing and analytics, introduced new challenges to legacy practices. I believe most federal data governance can be fulfilled with minor changes to existing processes that are already mature. That doesn't mean it's trivial and easy, but it means that we don't have to recreate the world by injecting minor new data behaviors, and some of my examples will hopefully illustrate that today. Okay, real quick, I'm sure you all probably know this better than me, that data governance is a team sport, but it just sure appears that CDOs need to build relationships and kind of negotiate data governance with everyone in the organization. It appears a little bit overwhelming. The examples on the slides will highlight what I think are some major stakeholder groups to interact with, and then the roles will change. So I'll just stop there. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So what is the enterprise data lifecycle? I'm just giving you the 30,000 view. Planning out a data initiative, scoping, creating and obtaining it. So designing a system that produces a data asset, start to generate it. You may buy data here. You may acquire it publicly. Storing and maintaining various types of, you start to enter the massive storage, reuse, and very much start to dip your foot into the data management platform reuse, using and enhancing. This is the analytics business problem, just creative reuses of data to solve business problems. I'll try and use a few examples about that today. So, and then what the DMBK calls dispose. So this includes various forms of archiving, retaining, and literally just destroying the data when everyone agrees it's no longer needed. Okay. Couple quick, these are the examples I'm going to touch on today. In planning, in this phase, establishing a seat at the investment management table for the CDO. I'll elaborate it. Primary stakeholder, investment management teams. Creating and obtain, this phase. Applying similar governance rigor for publicly acquired data as that of our own production data, which we tend to be more careful with. So they're focusing on the business units and the people who are acquiring the public data to complement their analytics. Storing and maintaining. I have an analytics requirement example here that will hopefully very much help our platform operations team and keep us out of hot water with our cybersecurity teams. Use and enhance. A quick note to quickly assess how involved our data storage and our communication teams are when incidents arise and we change the way we're accessing data to resolve it, or maybe we're changing the data a little bit, and with complex analytics models that can require a little extra attention. And then disposing, I've got some suggestions for consideration, just being judicious about how and when we are, or in most cases, hopefully, not saving versions of analytics, versions of the production data. All right, so let's start with establishing a seat at the investment management table. So CDOs are typically already at the table because they're part of executive committees, and executive committees have a role in approving major investments. Federal government usually does their formal investment management processes with major investments, large cost systems. So for consideration, this could be the first opportunity to start to establish data-related, data impacting, data perspectives before we've even built the system and started producing the data. Now, I don't hear a lot of customers asking for that. I'm offering it as an opportunity. So maybe if we're lucky enough to have some insight into what the ethical use of our data might be, like it can go into the record when we're creating or considering the investment of the system that's going to produce the data. If we can confirm with confidence the data is not going to be highly duplicative of data we already have, it's a good way to heads up. We're already confirming this data is not, we're not creating duplicate data. First opportunity to establish awareness of the pending data asset. What if we created a coming soon record in our data catalog? I walked around to every data catalog vendor I could see in the hallways, in the back room where the food was, and they confirmed that no clients are asking for that. But I know from experience that surveying the needs of the business units, just to collect an inventory of analytics use cases, to understand, well, what features are you going to need for your data management platform, your analytics platform? What data sources do you need access to? They're clamoring for awareness of data. It's very, very hard to measure outcomes of federal programs that use funding when a good education example is the federal government funds certain education programs that impact certain groups of US students, right? So measuring how the ability to obtain a job or the ability to achieve higher compensation requires getting your hands on the program data, the students involved. This is federal and state level, universities, tying it back to labor data, tying that to compensation data. Business units are clamoring for what data do we have? I need to know what I can tie together, what I can link together to determine outcomes. And if we could tell them ahead of time, major system asset, it's gonna produce a new form of compensation data resulting from educational programs that just every day they'd be waiting. Can I have it? I'm ready for it. I'm really waiting for it. And one of the vendors I spoke with mentioned, well, we don't actually have a feature to label it distinctly, but we could use our flexible metadata to do so, and we could use the what do they call it, the marketplace features we have, or the shopping cart features they have, so people could express their demand for it before the data is ready. So I'll leave it to the audience to determine if that would be helpful information. I recognize agencies have piles of data waiting to go into the brand new data lake they just invested. And most all of the focus is on, we got to get the data in there, we got to make it available, people have to reuse it. It's one of our jobs as the CDOs. But I'm just hoping this is a helpful consideration to help establish data perspectives as early as you can in the data lifecycle, to truly treat data as a true asset. And I was really grateful for one of the federal CDOs from IRS, I believe it was CDO and analytics leader, on the 10A session yesterday, was asked, what are some things coming up that you really want to focus on to help the organization? And her comment was, I want to establish data perspectives at the onset. I think she meant the onset of operations or life of the data or something. And these just feel like some ways. I was grateful she said it because I knew I was going to share these with you. But it just felt like maybe it complements needs. These don't have to be the techniques you use to do it, but they're food for thought. Please. Who's got the mic? There we go. Yeah.
We have folks dialing in. This helps them.
So just a quick question, right? You mentioned embedding data governance information as part of that workflow. What type of information would you consider as, let's say, the top priorities to include in that kind of embedment?
I have a couple. Thank you for the question. What was your name, by the way? Lafir. So, Lafir, I have a couple examples, but ultimately the environment needs to pick what matters most to them. So, very, very early, I believe, I'm not an investment management guy, but when you're approving the investment of a major system asset that's going to produce critical data, I believe it would be helpful to us to just let everybody know ahead of time, here's the domain it fits into. Here's our swag determination that before we've even designed the data model, we don't think it's going to duplicate any of the data we have. I mean, those are questions that get asked later. Let's do a quick assessment on the privacy rating. Yeah, and we will almost assuredly have to change some of that information when it comes down the line. But if I'm the business unit clamoring for the data so I can use it in my analytics, I'm getting ready because it was labeled as high sensitivity. So those are just examples. And by the way, the federal government uses a great shared service called Folio. It's an adjustable workflow tool where cybersecurity and EA, they established their presence in the investment management process a long time ago because the federal government required security to be involved throughout the entire system lifecycle. Well, all we need to do is follow their lead. Like let's one of the many people the CDO needs to negotiate and build relationships with. Let's go to the investment management team, negotiate a couple key attributes, get added to the workflow. It shows up in every record every time a major investment comes across the table, and I hope something like that can be pretty lightweight and helpful. No?
I'm back and forth about whether to say something, but
All right.
Elaborate if you want, but we're killing time.
Okay. So we'll have a few minutes at the end for questions, but I definitely want to hear the perspective of feds. Okay, this one's going to be pretty short and sweet. Publicly available data can slip through some governance cracks. We bring it in, it feels safe, we use it. 6 months down the line, some people may not know what it is or what provenance to plan for. Simply just suggesting treat publicly available data that has no PII, totally safe, it feels innocuous. Just treat it with the same level of governance. Minimally create a record in the data catalog. Someone will discover a need for reusing the public data that you brought in for purpose A down the line. It happened. I mean, literally just happened a few months ago in client engagement. Okay, I'll move on because spent a lot of time on the previous one. Okay, marrying data governance disciplines to platform governance. Let me refer to my notes because I want to make sure I cover all these. Okay, so sometimes there can be a rush to get data into a brand new data management platform. And sometimes there can even be success metrics based on the number of data sets that get ingested into the data management platform that are separated from what is the data set going to do once it's in there to help the business. So I wanted to offer just a general suggestion to, just for consideration if it works in your environment, where maybe use phase-oriented requirements based on like an analytics lifecycle. I'll use CRISP DM as the example here. If I've got a phase where I'm doing what I think CRISP calls business understanding and data understanding, I think in past years that was just called discovery. The idea is I need to describe the users, the data, the portions of the data, the features I need just to get it in there, ingest it, and do some discovery before I start modeling. And that's a much easier problem to solve than describing all of your modeling and validation needs, all of your publishing needs down the line. You can just get started with a small focus on the earliest phase of an analytics lifecycle. That could potentially help the rush to get data into a platform it's just easier. You don't have to wait long, just maybe hash out your requirements for the first phase. Another reason I suggested is the needs for the platforms change from phase to phase. So the number of users, the portion of the data, the data sets, and definitely the services we use, they're going to change from business and data understanding, discovery, to pre-processing or data prep, to actual modeling, right, to validation. I mean, every phase, different users are going to be involved, and you're going to be using different aspects of the data and using different features. The platform ops team, they're not going to know all that variance unless we tell them. And I'm just suggesting, maybe just break it down into stages, because that's when your significant changes will occur. It doesn't have to consume a lot of time. It's just a slightly different perspective on phases to inform the ops folks. And ultimately, if there's any security folks here, cyber folks, maybe they can keep me honest here, but the, what's it called? I know the acronym, OWASP, I wrote it down, where is it? Oh, sorry, the Open Worldwide Application Security Project. I always forget the name of that, but I haven't forgotten their top 10 cyber vulnerabilities list. Like the top 5 include misconfiguration of services is one of the top 5. Injections in the top 5, but the security access definitions. Like if we let them know, here's my needs, stage to stage through an analytics lifecycle, they can prepare and configure the services with understanding. And if we don't give them that clarity, there is a risk of misconfiguration. And misconfiguration historically has had a negative contribution to web vulnerabilities. And it just feels like something that we can break it into pieces, get started by getting our data into the platform a little sooner, and give clarity to the ops folks. And just over time, I just feel like that would scale well. So curious at some point if anybody agrees with that or has a suggestion on how to improve that idea. Okay, this one's quite lightweight too. So including data storage and communication teams for pivotal data governance decisions. When a platform incident or a web incident's discovered, all agencies have a mature incident management and incident resolution process. I mean, it very much emphasizes the security roles. Starts with the incident commander and flows down to engineers. And there's a little blurb in there for product. And I surveyed 5 before I came here, 5 processes. I just Googled them for different agencies and plus the agencies I've worked at. And I don't mean to imply product, data stewards, comms teams are not involved or don't have the opportunity involved. I'm just suggesting the agency consider the nuances of impact of change for multivariate complex analytics models or aggregation where we change something. We change the access a little bit to resolve the data. Maybe we use the data slightly differently, tweak the model, or maybe we use less of a data set. Those can very easily have trickle-down effects to how the data is being aggregated, what potentially data disclosure risks might result, and then there's another example I'm forgetting. That's okay. I'll just move on. I know what it was. If the change to data and the change to data access is part of the incident resolution, what does it do to the message? So data that's published externally by federal agencies is scrutinized heavily. Dashboards that show what we're doing with federal funding is scrutinized heavily. So I just want to suggest, run through your comms teams, run through your approvers that say you're cleared to go with this message if you're publishing externally. When you get a model that merges 6 data sets, aggregates it, and it's interpreted through filters and dashboards, there's a lot of connectivity and nuance there. Just make sure the message is still consistent, because you approved it before it went out the door the first time. An incident was discovered, you shut it down for a sec, and then I'm just suggesting re-engage and just be careful, because that point of scrutiny, if you're doing external publishing of analytics, can be quite high. All right, let's see what else. All right, the last actual suggestion. 5 minutes, okay. All right, consider whether you want to save analytics versions of data. Records management teams have well-documented policy from years ago that talk about major communication records like executive emails and such. A little bit of guidance on how long to save production data. I'm not finding governance and direction on what to do to save analytics versions of data. So I'm just suggesting a minor little governance insertion, like a small lightweight checklist. If you have full provenance of all the data, you have control of all the dependencies. It comes from all your production systems that are very well understood and well documented. But you can regenerate it in your data lake because the data lake's automated. Don't save that data. It's just a suggestion. If subject to a legal hold, it's under a FOIA investigation, you have no choice. You got to save it, at least that snapshot. And then finally, if you're required to show how data is being used under certain circumstances, maybe just consider saving the access logs rather than the data itself. Because in today's modern data management platforms, Azure, AWS, Informatica, et cetera, it's very easy to regenerate analytics data assets, which are all built on our own production data. Food for thought. Okay, so through today's examples, I hope that is kind of the phase-by-phase, major stakeholder perspective I shared. There was something that was helpful today, compelling. You take it back, think about it, make it better. That was the goal, to just try and give some helpful thinking, where I've observed from agency to agency the last few years. They're in place, data lifecycles are in place, but the work to truly integrate it and all the procedures and policies and governance that exists hasn't quite started. It's really, really slow, hard work. So that's it.
Very good. All right, thank you. We have time for a question or two here, if folks would like to share anything. I know there was a potential in the mid-row there. Yeah, 1 minute.
I know at the origin you said you didn't want to hear that we're already doing it, but you wanted to hear something that's a contrast, right? So I'll actually give you 2 parts.
Thanks.
So in the first, I'd say, so going back to the beginning part where I made my faces, was that I actually think we have worked with contracting in particular to ensure that in government contracts, we require things such as documentation and other things that are required for governance. So I'd say on the books, we're doing it. what's been our problem, so this is where the contrast, where's it not happening, is that oftentimes documentation and governance are the first things to go when timelines start to slip.
Sure.
And right, isn't this kind of the proverbial thing on some level, right? But that's, so it's happening on the books. It's not necessarily happening when the contractor vendor teams are on the floor actually doing the work. And that's been I've seen across multiple agencies, the biggest crux. So trying to get like a good data dictionary seems so simple, but it's really freaking hard to get it out of certain teams.
Yeah, especially when time runs short.
Exactly. So, then people start trying to come up with ways that when you get, let's say, data architecture documents from people, trying to use like scikit-learn and other different techniques to try and impute meaning, right, from data dictionaries you already have. Are there common terms? So I start thinking of ontologies, which I think is going on in a different room, right? Some ways to do categorization. Long story short, I just say I agree with you that it'd be great to do that, and I'd say we are doing it. It's just that in practice, annoyingly, it's not happening because oftentimes our IT counterparts aren't enforcing the requirement for some of the documentation and aspects that would actually see through to the governance things we really need to have happen. Right.
Well said.
Yeah.
I don't believe, I believe federal agencies don't need help figuring out ideas like this. The major gist of the message is the C of processes and people, and we can break it into small pieces, maybe one phase at a time, one stakeholder group at a time, and use lightweight data behavior changes like this, just one piece at a time, and just to get started. Yeah, certainly don't mean to imply that government agencies don't apply the disciplines that result in these behaviors. It's just more like we have a bunch of little behaviors to introduce because of modern data management, data security, data analytics complexity, and bite it off, just one bite at a time, those small pieces. That was the point. Please.
What is your approach to those small pieces? Do you take a risk-based approach, and because you can't do it all, can't boil the ocean? So what's your approach in saying, okay, this is where I really have to focus? Like you're at the seat and you're informing on what are those important pieces, or maybe with the data stewards and the comms, there's a reputation risk if you don't do it. Like how do you build some of that discipline in these different pieces, or what different approaches have you seen and might work?
So I'll start with something one of Citizen's brilliant customers said in the last 6 months. How do you eat the elephant one bite at a time, right? So you gotta start small, just to make progress, right? Also, the required activity just kind of all seems to be right here. Agencies still appear to be wrangling all of the data assets they've built up over decades. What is it? How should I describe it the best way in my data catalog? How do I get it in there? And then, what should go first in the data lake or the analytics environment? That kind of triggers that maybe some of the requirements practices I suggested for analytics-focused requirements might go first before you go back and talk to the investment management team. That's driven by the agenda, the responsibilities that the CDO executive has and the CAO, and we're kind of forced to support there, not forced, but the already assigned work dictates what goes first. So I have a personal opinion that if we were to carve out just a little bit of precedent, and maybe even if we don't do it as a standard practice, let's just throw a couple coming soon examples out there. It might tease people to expect it in the future. They might respond to it. I'm not saying we make a whole program and add it, and add a dozen attributes to the folio investment management workflow. Let's just maybe announce one or two major data assets ahead of time and see how that works, while we're focusing on governance here for how we're defining the requirements for analytics, right? Or how well we're involving the data owners, data stewards, or comms teams here in incident management. Because in 6 to 12 months, a lot of agencies are gonna have 20 to 50 data sets in their data environments. Yeah, by the way, I'm influenced by my last 4 or 5 clients. Like they're all at this point where they're just getting it in there right now. And so maybe those go first. I mean, that was kind of a long and fuzzy answer, but I hope it helped a little.
This is great. So we've run a little bit over on time. Encourage folks to continue to engage one-on-one, but thank you very much, Chris.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.